In 1892, he set out to circle the globe on a bicycle, his camera his only companion. 2 years later, after surviving 14,000 miles of deserts and jungles, he rode into the Ottoman Empire and vanished forever. The official story called it a robbery gone wrong. But the investigation to find him, led by his greatest rival, would uncover a truth far more terrifying. It would expose a government-sanctioned secret, a crime so vast that the death of one American was just a footnote they needed to erase. This is the story of a man who saw too much, and the hero sent on a dangerous quest to unravel his fate. You will journey into the heart of a collapsing empire, witness a diplomatic crisis unfold, and be left with a chilling photograph that proves the official story was a lie from the very beginning. This isn't just about a lost cyclist. It's about how easily history can be buried. In the spring of 1892, Frank Lenz was more than a man. He was an idea. He was the promise of a new age, a dashing figure perched atop a strange and wonderful machine called the safety bicycle, ready to pedal his way around the entire world. He was leaving behind a dusty accountant's desk in Pittsburgh for a 20,000-mile journey into the unknown. His camera his only companion, his ambition his only map. But then, 2 years later, after surviving deserts, jungles, and angry mobs, he rode into the lawless heart of the Ottoman Empire. And the world he was so eager to photograph simply swallowed him whole. What followed his departure from Pittsburgh was a whirlwind tour of a world that had never seen anything like him. In the offices of Outing magazine, his sponsor, his letters and photographs were a sensation. The editor, a shrewd man named James Werman, knew he had a star on his hands. Frank wasn't just a cyclist, he was a storyteller, his dispatches painting vivid pictures for a public hungry for adventure. Mr. Werman, one letter read, penned from a tranquil tea house in Japan. The roads here are like silk ribbons laid across a green carpet. The people are kind and curious. They call my bicycle the jinrikisha without the man, the rickshaw without a runner. They bow to it as if it were a living thing. I feel as though I am riding through a beautiful dream. And then he crossed into China. The dream curdled into a nightmare. The roads vanished, replaced by muddy tracks that were more river than path. The curious crowds of Japan were replaced by hostile mobs who saw his silver machine not as a marvel, but as a demon. They threw stones at me today, he wrote, his handwriting shakier now. A whole village. They thought my camera was a black magic box that would steal their souls. I had to act the clown, to make them laugh, just to be allowed to pass. Looking back, I should have known that a smile can be a shield, but it cannot stop a stone. I am learning that the world is not as friendly as I had hoped. More importantly, his journey was a constant battle against the elements. He faced scorching heat on the plains of India and a blinding snowstorm in the high passes of the Himalayas. In fact, in the dense, suffocating jungles of Burma, he contracted malaria, a fever that left him delirious and weak for weeks in a missionary's hut. Still, he pushed on, because Frank Lenz was not a man who quit. He was driven by a deep need to prove himself, to outdo his famous rival, William Sachtleben, who had already completed a world tour with a partner. Frank was doing it alone, which meant the glory and the danger would be all his. By the time he reached Persia, 2 years into his journey, a deep weariness had settled into his bones. The adventure had become a grind. The thrill of the unknown had been replaced by the ache of profound loneliness. He sat in a bustling cafe in Tabriz, the last bastion of relative safety before the most dangerous leg of his journey, the wild, mountainous expanse of the Ottoman Empire. He wrote a letter to his mother, his words a mixture of bravado and heartbreak. "Dearest mother," he wrote, "I am well, though I must confess to a feeling of homesickness that is almost a physical pain. I am very, very tired of being a stranger. I long for the day which will see me again on my native hearthstone and my wanderings at an end. The final leg is before me. The locals here tell stories that would make your hair stand on end. They speak of Kurdish bandits who rule the mountains, and of a darkness that has fallen over the land. They say the Sultan is at war with his own people, that the roads are not safe for anyone, let alone a lone American on a bicycle. He paused, dipping his pen in the ink. But I have faced down mobs and survived jungle fevers. I have ridden through lands that time forgot. What are a few bandits to me? I shall be in Constantinople by summer, and then it is a straight ride home to you. Tell everyone I am well, and that I am coming home. But then, he added a final line, a postscript that in the months to come would haunt his family and his editor. A line that felt less like a confident declaration and more like a prayer whispered into the void. The camera has seen things I dare not write about, things that would break your heart. I will tell you everything when I see you. That night, he sat with a British diplomat, a man named Charles, who had taken a liking to the plucky American. "Frank, I must implore you to reconsider," Charles said, swirling the brandy in his glass. "The situation to the east. It is not just bandits. It is chaos. The Hamidian massacres, they call them. Entire villages are being wiped out. An American, a Christian, traveling with a camera. They will think you are a spy. It is a death sentence." Frank gave a tired smile. "Charles, my friend, I have been warned of death sentences in a dozen different languages. If I had listened to every warning, I would still be a bookkeeper in Pittsburgh dreaming of the world instead of seeing it." "This is different, Frank," Charles insisted. "This is not just danger. This is a political firestorm. You are a match walking into a powder keg." "Then I shall have to ride very fast," Frank said with a laugh, but the sound was hollow. Deep down, he sensed something was wrong. The world he had been riding through was changing, the shadows growing longer. The next morning, on May 2nd, 1894, he packed his gear. He cleaned his bicycle until it shone like a silver jewel. He waved goodbye to the small crowd that had gathered to see him off. He was a symbol of hope, of progress, of a world made smaller by courage and technology. But that wasn't just any morning. That was the last morning anyone would ever see him alive. He rode east, out of Tabriz, toward the rising sun and the dark waiting mountains of the Ottoman Empire. And then, he vanished. The last letter from Frank Lenz arrived at the New York offices of Outing magazine on a Tuesday in early May, smelling faintly of Persian dust and boundless optimism. And then, there was nothing. At first, the silence was a welcome thing, a pause in the narrative that allowed the editor, James Werman, to build suspense. But as the weeks bled into a hot, sticky June, the silence began to change. It stopped being a pause and started to become a presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket that settled over the office, growing louder and more menacing with each passing day. What followed was a slow, agonizing wait. The daily mail delivery became a ritual of quiet disappointment. Werman, a man whose mind worked like a cash register, tallying profits and losses, initially saw the delay as a marketing opportunity. He was a shrewd publisher, and he knew that a hero in peril sold more magazines than a hero who was safe. He wasn't worried because delays were a natural part of the grand tapestry of adventure he was selling to his readers. "Any word from Lenz today, Mr. Werman?" his young assistant, Arthur, would ask each morning. "Patience, Arthur. Patience," Werman would reply, not looking up from his ledgers. "The man is crossing the Ottoman Empire, not Central Park. He'll write when he can. In the meantime, the mystery is good for circulation. Let the readers wonder. Let them worry." But while Werman saw profit in the silence, hundreds of miles away in Pittsburgh, a mother heard only the sound of her own heart breaking. Anna Lenz lived for her son's letters. They were her connection to a world she could barely imagine, her proof that her adventurous boy was still safe. She would read them aloud to her neighbors, her voice filled with a pride that was fierce and protective. Now, her mailbox was empty. The silence in her small, quiet house was a physical ache. She would sit in her parlor, rereading Frank's old letters, tracing his familiar handwriting with her finger, as if she could somehow pull him home through the paper itself. Eventually, her quiet worry turned into a sharp, insistent fear. She penned a letter to Mr. Werman, her handwriting neat, but her words trembling with an anxiety she could not hide. "Dear Mr. Werman," she wrote, "I hope I am not a bother, but it has been over a month now since my Frank's last letter. I know he is in wild country, but he is always so good about writing. He promised he would. I pray every night that he is well. Has there been any word at all?" The letter landed on Werman's desk like a small, unwelcome stone. He read it with a sigh of annoyance. This was a complication he did not need. He saw the emotional plea of a mother as a business problem to be managed. "Arthur," he called out, "take a letter to Mrs. Anna Lenz. My dearest Mrs. Lenz, thank you for your correspondence. Please do not trouble yourself. Frank is a resourceful and experienced traveler. Delays in such remote territory are not only common, they are expected. The postal service in the Ottoman Empire is, I assure you, not as reliable as our own. Rest assured, the moment we receive a dispatch, you will be the first to know. The entire world is following your son's brave journey, and we are confident he will emerge from this latest challenge with another thrilling tale to tell." He leaned back in his chair, satisfied. The letter was a masterpiece of corporate reassurance, designed to soothe and deflect. Because, truth be told, a small, cold seed of doubt had begun to sprout in his own mind. July came and went, a wave of suffocating city heat. Then August. Still nothing. The public, which had been following Frank's journey with rapt attention, began to murmur. Other newspapers, smelling a story, started printing small, speculative articles. "Has Outing's famed cyclist met with trouble?" one headline asked. The pressure mounted. Werman's carefully constructed narrative of adventure was beginning to crumble. The silence was no longer a clever marketing tool. It was a void. He found himself standing before the large map of the world that hung on his office wall, a map covered in pins and string that traced Frank's incredible journey. The string stopped abruptly at Tabriz. The vast, empty space beyond it, the space labeled Ottoman Empire, now looked like a gaping mouth, a place where maps ended and nightmares began. He couldn't admit it to his staff, and certainly not to Anna Lenz, but he was scared. He was scared because he had sent a young man into that void, and the void had not sent him back. That night, unable to sleep, he unlocked the safe in his office and pulled out Frank Lenz's file. He spread the letters and photographs across his desk. There was Frank in Japan, smiling beside a cherry blossom tree. There he was in China, covered in mud, but grinning triumphantly. He was so alive, so full of a relentless, infectious optimism. Werman's gaze fell on the last dispatch from Tabriz. He read it again, the words now taking on a new, sinister weight. "The camera has seen things I dare not write about." What had he seen? What secrets had that glass lens captured that were too terrible for words? Werman felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He had thought he was selling a story about a bicycle. But what if he had stumbled into a story about something else entirely? Something dark and bloody and political. As if summoned by his thoughts, a cable arrived. It was from the British diplomat in Persia, the man named Charles who had befriended Frank. Werman's hands trembled as he tore it open. The message was short, cryptic, and terrifying. It did not mention Frank by name. It didn't have to. Situation east of Tabriz has deteriorated into utter chaos, widespread violence. No Westerner is safe. Official channels are useless. Advise all citizens to stay away. Repeat, stay away. And just like that, the problem was no longer a missing person. It was an international incident in a land without rules, a land that had just swallowed his star correspondent whole. The cable from the British diplomat was not a message. It was a death certificate written in code. And as James Werman, the editor of Outing magazine, stood in his quiet New York office, the silence left by Frank Lenz was no longer a mystery. It was a roar. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to his core that he had sent a young man to his death. But the world didn't want a tragedy. It wanted a hero. And if he couldn't bring back the original, he would have to hire another. So, he made a call to the one man on Earth who could follow Frank's ghost, the only other man who had tamed the world on two wheels, his greatest rival, William Sachtleben. What followed was a meeting of titans in the hushed wood-paneled world of a Manhattan club. William Sachtleben was everything Frank Lenz was not. Where Lenz was a romantic, an artist with a camera, Sachtleben was a pragmatist, a celebrity who understood the business of adventure. He had just returned from his own triumphant world tour, and he was enjoying the fruits of his fame. He listened as Worman laid out the situation, his voice a low, desperate hum. "He's just gone, Sachtleben," Worman said, swirling the brandy in his glass. The letters stopped. The photographs stopped. It's as if he rode off the edge of the earth. Sachtleben leaned back, a picture of cool confidence. "The Ottoman Empire is not the edge of the earth, Worman, but it might as well be. I've been there. It's a place of shadows and whispers. What makes you think he's not just delayed?" "Because of this," Worman said, pushing the diplomat's cable across the table. Sachtleben read the stark warning. His confident expression tightened. "Chaos. Violence. This is more than just a delay." "Exactly," Worman said, leaning forward. "I need you to go. Find him. Or at the very least, find out what happened to him. Outing will cover all your expenses. We will pay you handsomely. And the story, my God, the story will be legendary. Sachtleben rescues Lenz. It will make you the most famous adventurer in the world." The offer hung in the air, a glittering lure. Sachtleben didn't need the fame, but the challenge, the sheer impossible audacity of it, that he could not resist. To ride into the heart of a collapsing empire to find the one man who had dared to follow in his footsteps. It was a story too good to pass up. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm. "But I'm not doing it to rescue him. I'm doing it to find out the truth." Because he knew, better than anyone, that in the wild places of the world, the truth was the only thing that could set a man's spirit free, even in death. From there, Sachleben's journey into the Ottoman Empire was a descent into a world of smoke and mirrors. When he arrived in Constantinople, he found a city holding its breath. The air was thick with the smell of coal and fear. He presented his papers to the Ottoman officials, men with tired eyes and elegant suits who treated him with a politeness that was as thin as ice. "Mr. Sachtleben," one official, a man named Pasha, said through a translator, "we are, of course, devastated to hear of the disappearance of your countryman, a terrible tragedy." "Then you'll provide me with papers to travel to Erzurum?" Sachtleben asked, getting straight to the point. Pasha smiled, a slow, unreadable expression. "Erzurum? That is a very difficult region, very unstable. It is not safe for a man like you." Mr. Lenz seemed to think it was safe enough, Sachtleben countered. "Yes, a tragedy, as I said," Pasha repeated, his eyes never wavering. "Our official belief is that he was the victim of Kurdish bandits. They are a lawless people. They plague the mountains. They see a foreigner on a strange silver machine, and they see only profit. It is a sad but common story." The explanation was too neat, too simple. It was a story designed to be the end of a conversation, not the beginning of one. Sachtleben felt a prickle of mistrust. He had heard stories like this before, stories that governments told to cover up truths they didn't want the world to see. To make things worse, the American consulate was no more helpful. They advised him to go home. They told him the case was a lost cause, that he was risking his life for a ghost. But Sachtleben was not a man who listened to warnings. He used his fame and a series of carefully placed bribes to forge the papers he needed, and he set out for Erzurum, a city deep in the heart of the chaos. And it was there that the true nature of the horror began to reveal itself. He saw it in the faces of the people, in the burned-out shells of villages along the road, in the terrified silence of the Armenian Christians who would scurry away from him, their eyes wide with a fear that was older and deeper than the fear of simple bandits. He found lodging with an American missionary, a man named Dr. Reynolds, whose face was a mask of weary despair. That night, Sitting by a weak fire, Reynolds told him the truth. "You think you are looking for a lost cyclist?" the doctor said, his voice a low, trembling whisper. "You are blind. You are walking through a graveyard. The Sultan has unleashed his dogs on the Armenians. They are calling it the Hamidian massacres. They are wiping them out, village by village. This is not robbery, Mr. Sachtleben. This is extermination." The doctor's words landed like a physical blow. The disappearance of Frank Lenz was no longer a simple crime. It was a single drop of blood in an ocean of it. And in that moment, Sachtleben's professional mission became a burning, personal obsession. He wasn't just looking for a man anymore. He was looking for the reason a man's life was worth so little in this God-forsaken land. As if summoned by guilt, a young Armenian man, a boy really, approached Sachtleben in the market the next day. His name was Vartan, and his hands trembled as he slipped a note into Sachtleben's palm. The note contained only an address and a time. That night, Sachtleben went to a dark, quiet alley behind a bakery. Vartan was waiting in the shadows, his face pale with terror. "You must be careful," Vartan whispered, his words tumbling out in a rush. "They are watching you. The officials. They do not want you here." "I'm not leaving until I know what happened to my friend," Sachtleben said, his voice firm. Vartan took a deep, shuddering breath. "It was not just bandits," he said, his eyes darting around the alley. "It was him, the one they all fear, the one the government protects." "Who?" Sachtleben demanded. "They call him the Butcher of the Pass," Vartan said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A Kurdish chief named Musa Bey. He rules these mountains. He does the government's dirty work, and he takes what he wants." Vartan leaned closer, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a desperate need to tell the truth. "My cousin. He was there. He saw it. He said Musa Bey stopped your friend on the road. He had never seen a bicycle before. He thought it was made of pure silver. He thought it was a machine of the devil. And that wasn't even the worst part. He didn't just want the bicycle, sir," Vartan whispered, his voice cracking. "He wanted to see if the devil would bleed. The Butcher of the Pass." The name hung in the air of the dark alley, a thing with claws and teeth. It was no longer a vague story of bandits. It was a portrait of a specific evil, a man named Musa Bey who killed for sport and was protected by the very government that promised to help. In that moment, William Sachleben's quest for a missing man became a hunt for a monster who wore the smiling mask of official protection. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that to find Frank Lenz he would have to walk directly into the butcher's lair. What followed was a descent into a moral fog, a world where truth and lies danced together in the smoky tea-houses of Erzurum. Sachtleben's first task was to find the witness, Vartan's cousin, the man who had seen Musa Bey with Frank. But fear was a plague in this city, and the family was terrified. He met Vartan again, this time in the relative safety of Dr. Reynolds's missionary clinic, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and despair. "He will not speak to you," Vartan said, his eyes wide and haunted. "His mother. She weeps all day. She says you have brought a curse upon their house. She says Musa Bey has 100 eyes and 100 ears, and that to speak his name is to invite death to your door." "But he's the only one who saw what happened," Sachtleben insisted, his frustration a sharp, bitter taste in his mouth. "Without his testimony, I have nothing but rumors. I need him to tell me what he saw. I need him to describe the men, the place, the final moments." "You ask him to describe his own grave," Vartan whispered. "Because that is what will happen. Musa Bey is not just a man. He is a tool of the Sultan. He helps with the cleansing. The government looks the other way when he robs and kills because he serves their purpose. To testify against him is to testify against the empire itself." The weight of it settled on Sachtleben like a physical shroud. He had come here as an American, a citizen of a powerful nation, believing his passport was a shield. But here, in this land of ancient hatreds and shifting allegiances, it was just a piece of paper. He was not a celebrity adventurer here. He was a fly caught in a spider's web, and every move he made only entangled him further. From there, the official obstruction intensified, becoming a polite, maddening form of psychological warfare. He would meet with the local governor, Pasha, who would offer him tea and condolences, all while his eyes held a cold, reptilian stillness. "Mr. Sachtleben, any news?" Pasha would ask, his voice dripping with false concern. "I have a name," Sachtleben said one afternoon, deciding to force the issue. "Musa Bey. The locals say he controls the pass where Lenz disappeared." Pasha's smile didn't waver. "Ah, Musa Bey. A strong man. A friend to the government. He helps keep the peace in a very difficult region. A bit rough around the edges, perhaps, but a necessary force for order. Why would a man like that trouble himself with a single foreign cyclist? Perhaps because the cyclist's machine was made of silver," Sachtleben countered, watching the governor's face for a reaction. Pasha chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. "My dear boy, you have been listening to the stories of peasants. They see demons in every shadow. I assure you, Musa Bey has more gold than he could ever spend. He has no need for a silver bicycle." Every conversation was a dead end, a door politely closed in his face. The moral fog was thick, and Sachtleben felt himself losing his way. Was Vartan telling the truth? Or was he a pawn in some local feud, using the American to settle a score? Who was the real enemy? The savage bandit in the mountains or the smiling official in the silk suit who protected him? To make things worse, his own confidence began to unravel. He spent his nights rereading Frank's letters, the cheerful, optimistic words now feeling like a cruel joke. He found one that had been published in Outing just before Lenz left for Persia. In it, Frank described his camera with an almost romantic affection. "My camera is my unblinking eye," he had written. "It does not judge, it does not lie. It simply captures the truth, whether the world wants to see it or not. It is my proof that I was here." The words now felt like a prophecy. What truth had that unblinking eye captured? What had Frank seen that the world did not want to see? The thought became an obsession, a burning question with no answer. The camera was the key. But the camera, like Frank, was gone. After weeks of hitting a wall of silence and fear, Sachtleben found a new lead, not from a witness, but from a whisper in a marketplace. An old Armenian merchant, a man who sold carpets and secrets, pulled him aside. "You look for the lost one," the merchant said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "You will not find him by asking questions. The men who know are either dead or too afraid to speak." "Then how?" Sachtleben asked, his hope a flickering candle in the wind. "There is a place," the merchant whispered, leaning closer. "A river, a few days' ride from here. They call it the River of Lost Things. When the government's soldiers, or men like Musa Bey, need to make something disappear, that is where it goes. It is a place of bad memories, a place the locals will not go near." The information was a dangerous, seductive thing. It was a tangible destination, a place on a map. It was a chance to do something other than talk in circles and drink bitter tea with liars. Against the strenuous objections of Dr. Reynolds, who called it a suicide mission, Sachtleben began to prepare for the journey. He felt a surge of his old self, the adventurer, the man of action. He would go to this river. He would find something, a piece of the bicycle, a button from Frank's coat, anything. But then, on the morning he was set to leave, Vartan appeared at the missionary gate, his face ashen, his body trembling. He didn't need to say a word. Sachtleben knew. "What happened?" he asked, his voice flat. "My cousin," Vartan choked out, tears streaming down his face. "They took him, the secret police. They came in the night. They said he was a revolutionary. They said he was plotting against the Sultan." The air left Sachtleben's lungs. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a receipt, a clear, brutal message sent directly to him. "Stop digging, or the people you talk to will be buried." He looked at Vartan's terrified, tear-streaked face and felt the full, crushing weight of his own quest. He had come here to find justice for one man, but his search was now a death sentence for others. The moral fog had finally cleared, revealing a single, horrifying truth. He couldn't save Frank Lenz, and he was getting innocent people killed by trying. The news of the arrest was not a warning. It was a cage door slamming shut. And in that moment, standing in the cold, sterile light of the missionary clinic, William Sachtleben felt the hero inside him die. He had come to this land of shadows as a titan, a celebrated adventurer on a noble quest. But now, looking at Vartan's terrified, tear-streaked face, he saw himself for what he truly was, a careless, arrogant fool who had led an innocent man to the slaughterhouse. The search for Frank Lenz was no longer a grand adventure. It was a crime scene, and he was an accomplice. What followed was a night of profound, soul-crushing despair. Sachtleben locked himself in his room, the sounds of the city outside a distant, mocking reminder of a world that was still moving, while his had ground to a halt. He paced the floor like a caged animal. The face of Vartan's cousin burned into his mind. He had promised these people justice. He had promised them the protection of his name, of his country. But his promises were worthless here. They were just foreign words that had turned into a death sentence. The weight of his failure was a physical thing, a pressure in his chest that made it hard to breathe. He was not just failing to find Frank Lenz. He was actively destroying the lives of the very people who had tried to help him. From there, he stumbled into a confrontation with the one man who had warned him. He found Dr. Reynolds in the clinic's small chapel, a place that smelled of old wood and unanswered prayers. The doctor was on his knees, but he wasn't praying. He was just staring at the simple wooden cross, his shoulders slumped with the weight of all the suffering he had witnessed. "They took him," Sachtleben said, his voice a raw, broken thing. "Vartan's cousin. They took him because of me." Dr. Reynolds rose slowly, his face a mask of profound sadness. "I know," he said quietly. "I tried to tell you, William. I tried to warn you that this place, it does not play by your rules. I thought I could make a difference," Sachtleben stammered, the words catching in his throat. "I thought I could find justice." "Justice?" The doctor gave a short, bitter laugh. "There is no justice here. There is only power. And you, with your righteous quest and your famous name, you are nothing but a stone thrown into a deep, dark river. You make a splash, yes. But the river just swallows you up and keeps flowing." He stepped closer, his eyes boring into Sachtleben's. "You came here looking for one lost man. But did you ever stop to look around you? Did you see the hundreds, the thousands, who are being lost every day? Did you see the real story that is happening right outside this door?" The doctor's words were a knife, twisting in a wound that was already gaping. Because of that, the entire narrative of his quest fractured. He had been so focused on the single tree of Frank's disappearance that he had failed to see the entire forest burning down around him. He had seen the massacres, yes, but he had seen them as a backdrop, a dangerous setting for his own heroic story. He had not seen them as the story itself. And then, the twist. The final terrible piece of the puzzle clicked into place. He stumbled back to his room, his mind reeling. He pulled out Frank's last letter, the one that had haunted him for weeks. "The camera has seen things I dare not write about." He had thought it was just a dramatic turn of phrase, but now he understood. Frank hadn't just been a tourist with a bicycle. He had been a journalist with a camera, an unblinking eye in the middle of a genocide. And his camera hadn't just been capturing landscapes, it had been capturing proof. Proof of the burnings, proof of the killings, proof of the government-sanctioned extermination of the Armenian people. The realization was a physical blow. It was so much worse than he had imagined. Frank Lenz hadn't been murdered for a silver bicycle. He had been executed for what he knew, for what he had photographed. And Musa Bey wasn't just a greedy bandit. He was a government assassin, a man tasked with silencing a dangerous witness and destroying the evidence he carried. Nothing was as it seemed. The robbery was a lie. The story of the superstitious chief was a lie. It was all a carefully constructed fiction, a cover for a crime so vast and so terrible that the death of one American cyclist was just a footnote. In that moment, Sachtleben's obsession collapsed into a black hole of helplessness. He understood now why the officials had been so unhelpful, why the American consulate had warned him away. They all knew. They all knew that to find the truth about Frank Lenz was to uncover the truth about the massacres, and that was a truth that no one in power, neither Ottoman nor American, wanted to touch. It was too messy, too complicated, too bad for business. His quest was not just impossible, it was politically inconvenient. He was a man screaming in a soundproof room. He began to pack his bags, his movements slow and defeated. He had to leave. He had to get out before he got anyone else killed. He would go home and tell Werman the truth, a truth that would never be printed. He would tell Anna Lenz that her son had died a hero, a martyr who had seen too much. It was a small, cold comfort, but it was all he had left. He was a man broken by a secret he could never prove. But then, as he was closing his suitcase, there was a soft knock at his door. He opened it to find a small boy, no older than 10, his eyes wide and frightened. It was Vartan's younger brother. The boy didn't say a word. He just pushed a small, dirty cloth bundle into Sachtleben's hand, and then turned and ran, disappearing back into the shadows of the city. Sachtleben's hands trembled as he unwrapped the cloth. Inside, nestled in the dirty fabric, was a piece of shattered wood and a twisted piece of brass. It was a fragment of a large format camera. And on the brass, faint but unmistakable, was an engraved maker's mark. It was the same mark that was on Frank Lenz's camera equipment. He knew because he had studied the photographs of Lenz's gear before he left New York. It was a piece of the unblinking eye, a piece of the truth, and it had been found near the river of lost things. They hadn't destroyed all of it. A single, tiny piece had survived, and it had just been delivered into his hands. The small, dirty bundle in William Sachtleben's hand was heavier than a gravestone. It was a piece of the truth, a fragment of a camera that had seen too much, and it was proof. It was proof that Frank Lenz's ghost was not just a story whispered in the dark alleys of Erzurum. It was a crime with a physical trace. And in that moment, the despair that had crushed Sachtleben's spirit was burned away by a fire so hot and so pure, it felt like resurrection. He was no longer a man running from a fight. He was a man who had just been handed a sword. What followed was not a reckless charge into the mountains, but a cold, calculated retreat. Sachtleben knew he could not confront Musa Bey directly. That was a fool's game, a path that ended in a shallow, unmarked grave next to his friend. No, the butcher's power was not in his guns, but in the silence that protected him. The silence of the terrified locals, the silence of the corrupt officials, the silence of the indifferent diplomats. And Sachtleben knew, with a sudden, brilliant clarity, that the only way to fight a silence that deep was to answer it with a roar so loud it would be heard across the world. From there, he made his way to Constantinople, the glittering, rotten heart of the Ottoman Empire. He didn't go to the American consulate. He didn't go to the Ottoman officials. Instead, he went to a small, smoky hotel near the docks, a known haunt for the foreign correspondents who fed the world's hunger for stories of exoticism and collapse. He found the man he was looking for, a cynical, ink-stained British journalist named Alistair Finch. "Mr. Sachtleben," Finch said, a wry smile playing on his lips as he poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "The great adventurer. I heard you were in the East, chasing a ghost. I trust you found him?" "I found more than that," Sachtleben said, his voice low and steady. He placed the cloth bundle on the table between them. "I found a murder, and I found a cover-up that goes all the way to the Sultan's palace." Finch's smile faded. He unwrapped the bundle, his journalist's eyes instantly recognizing the fragment of the camera. "My God," he breathed. This is from the Cyclist? From Lenz? It is, Sachtleben confirmed. But this story isn't about a lost cyclist anymore, Alistair. That's just the hook. The real story's about what he saw, what he photographed before they killed him. And then, the moment of raw truth. Sachtleben laid it all out. He spoke of the Hamidian massacres, of the burned villages he had seen with his own eyes. He spoke of Musa Bey, the government's pet killer. He spoke of the officials who protected him, of the American diplomats who looked the other way. He painted a picture of a genocide, a systematic extermination of the Armenian people, with the murder of Frank Lenz as the single explosive piece of proof that could expose it all to the world. Alistair Finch listened, his cynical facade melting away, replaced by the hungry, predatory gleam of a man who has just been handed the story of a lifetime. This is dynamite, Sachtleben. This is more than just a story. This could bring down governments. I know, Sachtleben said. And that's exactly what I want. I want you to print it all. The names, the dates, the connection to the massacres. Use Frank's story. Make him the hero, the martyr. Make the world care about one lost American boy, and in doing so, you will force them to see the thousands of others who are dying in silence. They will deny it, Finch warned. The Ottomans will call it lies. Your own government will disavow you. They will say you are a grieving man driven mad by his quest. Let them, Sachtleben said, his eyes burning with a cold fire. But they cannot deny this. He pushed the camera fragment across the table. And they cannot deny the photographs I have taken myself. Pictures of the burned villages, pictures of the refugees. I am no longer just a cyclist, Alistair. I am a witness, just like Frank was. The story exploded onto the front pages of newspapers in London, Paris, and New York. Outings lost, cyclist murdered to hide atrocities, the headlines screamed. Sachtleben's harrowing first-person account, coupled with Frank Lenz's romantic backstory, created an international firestorm. The public was outraged. The story of one brave, adventurous boy being brutally murdered to cover up a genocide was a narrative so powerful, so morally clear, that it could not be ignored. What followed was a frantic, panicked standoff between empires. The American government, publicly shamed and backed into a corner, was forced to act. They sent a blistering diplomatic cable to the Sultan, demanding immediate action. The Ottoman government, furious at the exposure but desperate to avoid a full-blown international crisis, found itself with no other choice. They needed a scapegoat. And so, in a stunning reversal, they arrested Musa Bey. The butcher of the pass, the man who had been untouchable, was dragged from his mountain fortress in chains. A show trial was quickly arranged in Erzurum. Vartan and a few other brave Armenians, now protected by the presence of international journalists, were brought forward to testify. The story they told was the one the government wanted to hear, a simple, brutal tale of robbery. They spoke of Musa Bey's greed, of his belief that the bicycle was made of silver. They said nothing of the massacres, nothing of the camera. The official narrative was sealed. Justice, it seemed, had been served. Sachtleben watched the proceedings from the back of the courtroom, a bitter taste in his mouth. He had won. He had forced their hand. He had gotten his man. But it was a hollow, theatrical victory. The real crime, the genocide, remained an officially denied secret. He had exposed a murder, but he had failed to expose a Holocaust. A few weeks after Musa Bey was sentenced to life in prison, Sachtleben received a final, cryptic note from his journalist friend, Alistair Finch. "My friend," the note read, "I thought you should know. Word has reached us from Erzurum. It seems the prison had a rather unfortunate security lapse last night. Your man, the butcher, has escaped. He has vanished back into the mountains from which he came. My deepest condolences on your victory." Sachtleben crumpled the note in his fist. The killer was free. Justice was a performance. The system had won after all. But one thing still didn't make sense. In all the testimony, in all the reports, They had talked about the camera. They had talked about Frank's clothes, his money. But no one, not a single witness, had ever mentioned what happened to the one thing that started it all. The shining silver bicycle. Where was the bike? The question hung in the air, a final, unanswered ghost on a road full of them. William Sachtleben sailed away from Constantinople under a sky the color of a day-old bruise, the city's golden spires shrinking behind him until they were nothing but a memory. He had won. He had faced down an empire and forced it to name his friend's killer. But the victory felt like ashes in his mouth because he knew the trial was a lie. The conviction was a performance, and the real monster was not the butcher who held the knife, but the silent, smiling government that had handed it to him. What followed was a long, quiet journey across the Atlantic, a time for the roar of his quest to fade into the haunting whisper of its aftermath. He would stand on the deck of the steamship for hours, staring at the endless gray water, the fragment of Frank's camera a cold, hard weight in his pocket. He had gone to Turkey to find a man, but instead, he had found a truth so vast and so terrible that it had hollowed him out, leaving behind a ghost of the adventurer he once was. He was celebrated as a hero in the newspapers, the man who had avenged the lost cyclist. Yet, he felt only the profound, crushing weight of his failure. He hadn't brought Frank home. He had only managed to put a name on his tombstone. From there, his first meeting upon returning to New York was with James Werman in the plush, suffocating offices of Outing magazine. The editor greeted him not as a weary traveler, but as a triumphant commodity, his eyes gleaming with the promise of record-breaking sales. "Sachtleben, my boy, you've done it!" Werman boomed, clapping him on the back. "An absolute triumph. The public is eating it up. The Avenger on 2 wheels. We'll serialize your entire journey. It will be the biggest story of the decade." Sachtleben sank into a leather chair, the smell of cigar smoke and self-congratulation making him feel ill. "There's more to the story than what was in the papers, James," he said, his voice flat and tired. Of course," Werman said, already pacing the room, his mind racing with headlines. "The daring investigation, the threats, the confrontation with the savage chief, it's magnificent." "No," Sachtleben interrupted, his voice cutting through the editor's enthusiasm. "The real story. The reason Frank was killed. It wasn't about his bicycle, it was about his camera. He photographed the massacres, James. He had proof of the genocide." The word hung in the air, ugly and unwelcome. Werman stopped pacing. His smile faltered. What? The political situation? Sachtleben, that's not our story. Our story is about adventure. It's about a brave American boy and his bicycle. It's about a hero's quest. It is not about the internal politics of the Ottoman Empire. That is a messy, dangerous business we want no part of. It's the truth, Sachtleben insisted, his voice rising. It's why Frank is dead. It's the story he died trying to tell. We owe it to him to print it. Werman shook his head, his expression now one of cold, hard business. We owe it to our readers to give them a story they can understand. A story of good versus evil. A story about a bandit and a hero. We are not a political journal, William. We are a magazine about sport and adventure. To print what you're suggesting would be unwise. It would anger the government. It would alienate our advertisers. It would be a catastrophe. And in that moment, Sachtleben saw the final soul-crushing betrayal. He had thought the enemy was an empire half a world away. But the enemy was also here, in this comfortable room, a man in a fine suit who was willing to bury the truth for the sake of a good story and a healthy profit. The world didn't want the real story because the real story didn't sell. To make things worse, he still had one final, impossible task. He had to face Anna Lenz. He traveled to Pittsburgh, to the small, quiet house where a mother's hope had slowly withered and died. She greeted him at the door, a small, frail woman with her son's kind eyes that were now red-rimmed from months of weeping. She led him into her parlor, a room filled with Frank's memory, His trophies, his photographs, a map on the wall tracing his journey. "Mr. Sachtleben," she began, her voice a fragile whisper. "Thank you. Thank you for finding him, for giving him a name, for bringing him justice." Every word was a knife in his heart. He looked at this grieving mother, at her simple, unwavering faith in the goodness of the world, and he knew he could not tell her the truth. He could not tell her that her son had been executed by a government to cover up a genocide. He could not tell her that his death was just a political inconvenience. To do so would be an act of cruelty beyond measure. So he lied. He sat in her quiet parlor and he told her the story the world wanted to hear. He told her about the brave journey, about the wild mountains, about the evil bandit Musa Bey who had coveted her son's beautiful silver bicycle. He painted a picture of a heroic struggle, of her son fighting bravely until the very end. He gave her a hero to mourn, not a victim to pity. "He was so brave, Mrs. Lenz," Sachtleben said, the lie tasting like poison on his tongue. "He never once showed fear. He died an adventurer exploring the world he loved." Anna Lenz wept, tears of both sorrow and pride. "My boy," she whispered, clutching a photograph of Frank. "My brave, brave boy." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. Did they ever find his things, his camera, his beautiful bicycle? The question, so innocent, so simple, struck him with the force of a physical blow. The bicycle, the one thing that didn't fit the story. If it was just a robbery, where was the bike? Why wasn't it found in the village, sold for parts? The question hung in the room, a silent testament to the lie he had just told. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice barely audible. They never found the bicycle. They believe the butcher destroyed it, afraid of its magic." It was a weak, pathetic explanation, but it was all he had. He left her house that day feeling like a hollow man, a fraud who had built a monument of lies on the grave of his friend. He had given a mother comfort, but he had sacrificed the truth to do it. Years later, the final cynical act of the drama played out. The United States government, after years of diplomatic wrangling, announced that the Ottoman Empire had agreed to pay a compensation of $7,500 to the Lenz family. It was presented as a great diplomatic victory, a foreign power being held accountable for the death of an American citizen. But Sachtleben saw it for what it was. It wasn't justice. It was blood money. It was a check written to purchase the world's silence, a final shovelful of dirt on the truth of what had really happened in those dark, bloody mountains. The case was officially closed. But for William Sachtleben, the ghost of Frank Lenz, and the phantom of his missing silver bicycle, would ride beside him for the rest of his life. The history books have an ending for Frank Lenz. It is a neat, tidy story of a brave adventurer, a savage bandit, and a diplomatic victory that held a foreign empire accountable. But for William Sachtleben, the man who wrote that ending, the story never finished. It became a ghost that rode beside him for the rest of his days, a silent companion on the quiet, empty roads of a life that had lost its taste for adventure. He had gone to the ends of the earth to find a man, but instead, he had lost a piece of himself. What followed his return was a slow, quiet fade from the public eye. The celebrated hero, the man who had circled the globe, put away his maps. He gave up his lucrative speaking tours. He declined offers to write a thrilling account of his quest, because he knew that the story the world wanted was a lie, and the truth was a poison he had to swallow alone. He would sometimes see the new safety bicycles gliding silently down the streets of New York, their silver spokes flashing in the sun, and the sight would stop him in his tracks. Each one was a phantom, a reminder of the one piece of the puzzle that never fit: the bicycle. If Musa Bey had killed Frank for his silver machine, where was it? A thing that valuable, that unique, would have surfaced. It would have been sold for parts or paraded as a trophy. Its complete and total disappearance was not a sign of a simple robbery. It was the mark of a meticulous professional erasure. It was the one detail that screamed of a deeper, more organized crime. From there, he lived with the weight of the lie he had told Anna Lenz. He had given her a hero to mourn, and in doing so, he had helped craft the myth that would become history. He saw it printed in magazines, in books about great adventurers. Frank Lenz, the romantic pioneer struck down by a greedy Kurdish chief. It was a good story. It was just not the true one. And Sachtleben, the world's greatest adventurer, became the world's most haunted gatekeeper, protecting a mother's heart from a truth that would have shattered it into a million pieces. He had chosen kindness over truth, and he did not know if he had done the right thing. He didn't know what haunted him more, the image of Frank's last moments or the memory of his mother's grateful tear-filled eyes as she thanked him for the beautiful lie he had constructed. To make things worse, the world moved on. The Hamidian massacres became a footnote in the bloody history of the Ottoman Empire, a tragedy too vast and too politically inconvenient for the West to truly confront. The thousands of nameless Armenian ghosts were forgotten, their stories swallowed by the same silence that had taken Frank Lenz. Sachtleben would read the papers, watch the diplomats shake hands, and feel a rage so profound, so helpless, that it felt like a physical illness. He had held proof in his hands, not just of one murder, but of thousands, and he had traded it all for a show trial and a check for $7,500. He had won the battle, but he had lost the war for the truth. And then, years later, when he was an old man with gray hair and quiet hands, a package arrived. It had no return address, only a postmark from Istanbul. His heart pounded as he opened it, a familiar cold dread washing over him. Inside, there was no note. There was only a single faded photograph. It was not one of Frank's. The quality was poor, the image slightly blurred. It showed a group of 5 uniformed Ottoman soldiers posing proudly for the camera. They were smiling. But it wasn't the soldiers he was meant to see. In the background, leaning against the rough stone wall of a barracks, was a bicycle, a safety bicycle, with a distinct frame and pneumatic tires. It was dusty and forgotten, a piece of background scenery. But there was no mistaking it. It was Frank's bike. The photograph was not a confession. It was a final, silent taunt from a ghost. It was proof that the authorities had recovered the bicycle. It was proof that the entire story of Musa Bey and the robbery was a lie, a carefully staged performance from beginning to end. They had the bike all along, which meant they were there from the start. They hadn't just protected the killer. They had been the killer. He sat in his armchair for a long time, the photograph resting in his lap. The silence of his room as vast and as final as the silence of the Anatolian mountains. He had spent his life chasing a ghost, only to find out that the ghost was bigger and darker and more powerful than he could have ever imagined. He had thought he was telling a story about a lost cyclist, but he had been a character in a much larger, more terrible story all along. A story about how history is written, how truth is buried, and how the lives of the innocent are erased by the quiet, polite agreements of men in power. He looked at the photograph one last time, at the smiling soldiers and the forgotten bicycle. He thought of Frank, of his boundless optimism, of his belief that the world was a place of wonder waiting to be discovered. He thought of his last letter, the one where he said he was tired of being a stranger. Looking back, he should have known. He wasn't just homesick. He was sensing the end of the road. What would you have done? Would you have published the photograph and risked a war to tell a truth that no one wanted to hear? Or would you have let it go and allowed the ghost of one lost boy and the ghosts of thousands of forgotten people to finally rest in the silence they had been given? His goal was to circle the world, but his journey ended in the middle of a genocide. Frank Lenz's adventure was a collision between the bright promise of a new age and the dark heart of an old empire. To honor the memory of this lost pioneer, share this video. Let his incredible story be remembered. For more epic tales where history and mystery collide, subscribe to Concealed Story Room.